What's going on, Tim?
Dude, it's a wild, wild west out there, man. First the feds cut the rates, and then the rates bounce back on up. What the heck is going on in the world today, man? What are you seeing in the marketplace?
Well, it's been a while, Tim. We've probably been off for like a month, maybe two. It felt like who wants to sit here and just talk about bad news in real estate all the time? And then it was like we need to get back on here and talk about what's really going on in real estate because people have a lot of misconceptions and whatnot. So you and I were just having a conversation before we jumped on here about how tough it is out in the market right now. How many deals are getting canceled? How many deals are falling apart? What the harsh reality of the real estate market is. So give us your honest assessment of the local Southern Maryland or the greater Maryland, DC, Virginia area real estate market.
Well, let's face it is tough out there, Brian. I mean, there's no question about it. But the beautiful thing about it is, no, I'm here, man. Did I lose you?
No, there was just like a pause in between. I don't know if you lost.
So the biggest challenge right now, Brian, as everybody knows, is the lack of inventory. I mean, even the Federal Reserve Chairman, Mr. Powell, came out and said, "Hey, rates aren't going to fix the marketplace. Inventory is going to." And then we get a lot of promises by the presidential campaign, which I think everybody has put themselves on the sidelines. They've said, "You know what? Why do we want to buy now? Let's kind of wait off. The federal government's going to give me $25,000 to buy a house. Hey, this is kind of a win-win, right?" When we know A, there's no guarantee, B, there's no jump in inventory, and C, at the end of the day, people are going to miss out, Brian, because look, you know what? There are houses out there. They are far and few between, but they do come available. And honestly, this is the best time to buy. It really is. We keep saying that every year. And what's happened to values? They keep going up. And I think that's the key right there. I think people will miss out. Buy now, refinance in a year. I mean, there are opportunities out there. So that's the market.
Well, we said that, yeah. And I've talked to several people over the weekend who said, I'm out permanently unless this gets significantly better. And I don't see a formula for that happening because let's say, for instance, house prices softened and they went down 5% or they went down 10%, which would feel catastrophic, to be honest with you. If your $500,000 house is worth $450,000, that would feel catastrophic in some ways. But your payment would go from like $3,500 to, $3,150 or something like that. That's not going to feel.
It's not going to make
enormously
a
better.
Change. Correct. And it's not going to change the inventory. If the values drop down, sellers aren't going to come out of the woods saying, "Oh, we're going to sell because the value is dropping." That doesn't make sense. Now, I will tell you, there is some emphasis from some folks out there. And what they basically have said is, they've said, look, here's the problem in a nutshell. If we go in and continue this budget deficit that we have, right, all we're doing is accumulating more debt. How can we solve it? Here's the kicker: raising the capital gains rate. And I think that will in itself have some impact on the investors who are holding on to these houses, waiting for the right time to sell. I think we'll see some of the hedge funds, some of the folks out there starting to sell their homes with the idea that, you know what, why should we wait if we're going to lose another 20, 30% in the rate, in the value as far as the profit's concerned. So because of that, I think the increase in the capital gains will have some positive impact on getting houses on the marketplace. We are starting to see short sales on the horizon. We're starting to see foreclosures on the horizon. So I think more markets coming out. I'm getting a lot of demand from investors. I'm getting a lot of demand for hard money. So those two pieces are definitely falling into place.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus, is that most people are dealing with a lot more investors than we did a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And the one thing I'll say about foreclosures is, for most people, there hasn't been a good situation to do a lot of like cash out refis. So most people are sort of sitting on a fair amount of equity. They probably haven't refied in the past 2 or 3 years. So most people who are in any kind of a financial hardship, sometimes they don't think to do this, but the best option would be to cash out and to, hit the reset button and start over instead of that. But instead of going to foreclosure, if someone's faced with that situation, I think they're going to end up just having to sell in order to get out of that situation. But unlike 2010 through 14, where everybody was upside down, most people are ahead. So I think that we're not going to see a flood of foreclosures. So let's just speak to the group of people that are struggling right now, that are deciding, should I buy a house? What is going to change to see this, thing? So a lot of people, as are talking about, man, both of our phones are now blowing up. Waiting until after the election. So they're not kings or queens. We have a queen running. They can't just wave a scepter and give everybody $25,000 and that will make everything better. They would have to pass a law. It would have to get agreed to. And even if it did, Tim, I think the most aggressive plan was Kamala's plan to give $25,000 towards the purchase, but it's not $25,000 up front, right?
Correct.
Like it's a tax credit.
And what benefit is that?
So how would that even have any effect on your ability to buy the house? Well, you get a bigger tax return, right?
Yeah, but here's the problem. Most people, it's not a question of having cash in the back end. They need the cash up front. They need the down payment. They need the closing assistance. They need to make repairs to the property. They buy a house now. A lot of the sellers don't want to make repairs. They've got tight restrictions on when you can request repairs. There's a lot of issues out there, Brian. And so people are like, you know what? I need the money up front. My philosophy is change the concept from I need money up front to lowering the down payment requirements. We have USDA, it's 100%. We have VA, it's 100%. Why isn't FHA zero down, Brian? That's the answer right there, man. If we did that on a $400,000 house, I just saved the client 14 grand. And if you built it on a credit score model,
I agree.
That's based on that, it's a win-win, man. It really is. There's my phone, Brian. We have these conversations and the phones just blow up, man.
I know. Cool. Seriously. We need to start doing this podcast more often, Tim. Except for that was my wife. She's not buying a house, so that's not going to help us.
I hear you, man. I hear you. So the answer is that 25 is not going to help.
People are waiting on these 5% rates. Yeah, they're waiting on this election. They're waiting on these 5% rates. So they had one of the largest Fed rate cuts, a whole half a point in the middle of the year, or just a couple weeks ago.
Yes, sir.
And rates were at like 7.5, and then they dipped into the 6s for a while. We saw, rates getting locked in the low 6s for a minute. And then what happened after that?
Dude, I locked in a person at 4.99. That's how the market was. Isn't that crazy? But at 3 points, so they're buying it down. But they did that to be able to qualify for the house. It wasn't a question of they wanted the low rate. It's a question of, hey, how can I get this house done? And we talked about this. There are several steps that the federal government could do right now that would boost housing, that would have zero cost to the bottom line. But
we're also not kings, Tim. We're not also we're also not kings. We can't wave the scepter either. So just like going back to this question, rates went down for a while, and then have they gone back up? Because I think you said they have now gone back up. So where are we at?
Back up to July numbers. Yeah. So we're back into, it's kind of wild. It happened temporarily. We dropped into the 5s. We're back into the 6s. The Maryland Mortgage Program dropped down. It came back up. Everybody's moved back up. Why? Because the job creation, because they cut the rates. Now all the small businesses are saying this is great. Costs are going to go down. But there is that little red herring out there. Do you know what the red herring is? Longshoreman strike. If that occurs, right? If they go on strike, it'll just have a significant impact. It'll handicap our economy, which will create job loss, which in turn will cause the Federal Reserve having to lower rates rather. So I think that's the Benny.
So they kicked the can, right? They kicked the can till January.
Yeah, because they had the ability to kick it, and they kicked the can to January because it's after the presidential election. I mean, think about it, right? So everybody's on the sidelines. I think it's the biggest mistake. I really do. I think people need to get off the sidelines and realize You buy when the opportunity prevails itself. Maybe it's now, maybe it's next year, right? But you just don't say, I'm not going to do something and miss out on probably one of the best opportunities out there.
Yeah, my advice would be to take your time, and I've actually had this sort of conversation with all my buyers this year. It doesn't work. So if I was to strategize how to buy a house right now, I would take the longer like plan would be to maybe look for a house for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months, as long as it takes to find the right house. I would get out and I would look at, all the houses on the market to get a feel for the market. And there's going to be a gem that'll pop up that, you need to be able to jump on immediately.
Yep.
But it's not going to be a situation where you maybe go out on a weekend and, plan on looking at 4 or 5 and finding one and then necessarily making that decision. So I would say take longer. I would also say that, we've had this conversation now for like 4 years in a row. Things are probably not going to get better in the sense of if you wait till next year, house prices are going to drop or interest rates are going to be significantly lower. Meanwhile, house prices have been going up steadily. Now they slow down. They're not jumping 10 and 20%, but they jump like 5%. 5% is $25,000. So it's like people have this idea that they're going to save up for this, down payment and whatnot. Like you've not been able to outsave the market for a long time. You're not going to be able to save up $100,000. So if you had jumped in 4 years ago, look how much equity you would have had. Look how much you would have already sort of knocked down the payments just by, making those payments for the past 4 years. You would have had the tax savings over the past 4 years. When it comes to selling your house, the challenge is the idea that you have to turn around and buy one. So that's kind of holding people back, and the step to go from a 3.5% rate to a 7% rate or 6.5% rate. If you're buying a bigger house because you just had, another child and you're looking for one, or you've outgrown your house, or even if you want to downsize,
right?
I've had this conversation recently where like you got a bigger home and you want to downsize into a Rambler, and you're looking at, maybe you don't have a ton of equity that you're selling and you're not putting down the whole amount. You're going to finance it. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. And the other thing too, Brian, is you nailed it right there. A lot of contingent players are pulling out because they're contingent. They're afraid they're not going to find something at the same time. They're afraid they're not going to be able to sell. And that's why we are seeing a lot of folks jumping in using like a cash to keys program, some kind of a bridge loan, maybe a cash bridge, something of that caliber, to be able to still actively look, not miss an opportunity, but at the same time, remove some of that fear, if you will, the fear of I'm going to be homeless, the fear of I'm not going to be able to buy something, and have the ability to buy down. You're right, because people don't realize if they can downsize, even though the rate's going to be higher, the payment's going to be significantly lower, right? Because they've downsized the mortgage, they've downsized the amount. So no, I think you nailed it right on. Now I want to turn.
So I think people want to go ahead.
I want to turn your thought around to 2 other things. You ready? We have major issues right now in the Southeast. What are those 2 major issues?
Well, hurricane is coming.
Exactly. One we just had and one we're coming up. What's that going to do to the housing industry? That's going to have a significant impact as well.
Well, there's going to be some deals maybe down in Florida, on the place I want to live on the west coast of Florida. So it might be a good time to jump into that market, get yourself a good deal on a fixer-upper. You know what I mean?
Yeah, real fixer-upper as in from ground up, right? Yeah, some opportunity. Yeah,
hey,
there, Brian. Shit.
Speaking of ground up, Tim, like everybody tries to really outsmart the market. And some people have this idea that it's cheaper to buy a piece of land and build a house.
Correct.
And I hear that from people who are like, you know what? We're not going to buy a house. We're just going to build. Like, I'm going to say like every third person tells me that. What's the chances? What's the paint the picture, Tim, and I'll help you paint it. The reality of actually trying to buy a piece of land and build a house.
So let's talk about that. That's huge. And what I mean by that is, in a nutshell, and this is kind of insane, but it costs so much more to be able to build because, you and I talked about this infrastructure. Just, let's say you find a lot for 100,000. Okay. So you find the lot, right? It's number one, right? What's the cost to set it up? If it doesn't have well and septic, right? What's the normal cost, Brian, to do it?
Probably 40 grand for the well, 20 grand for the septic, $15,000 for the impact fees. Then you have to clear the lot. It's probably not going to be flat. It's probably not going to be
Correct.
tree-less. You have to chop the trees down and put a driveway in. So I think you're probably close to 100K before you
Easy.
have done anything on the house. So
So I've
then
spent
you got 100 in
100,000
the
a lot,
lot, you got 100 on
right?
the land. What's the
There you
cost
go.
of building today?
I mean, honestly, and everybody says, "Well, I'm just going to bring a trailer on board." Those things are expensive too, man. Double wide trailers are not cheap.
But let's assume we're going to build
Yeah.
a house, like not a trailer, because we can talk about that in a second. But like, let's say you want to build a house. We're talking like $300 to $400 a square foot, right?
No, when you do that, you're incorporating everything. I would tell you $200 a square foot is about right. So, 1,200 square foot house. Yeah, 1,200 square foot house, which to me is the bare basics. You're looking at 240,000, lots 100,000, and then you got your improvements 100,000. You just spent $440,000 for a 1,200 square foot home. You can still get a home, for less than 400,000. That's going to have everything you're looking for, right? I mean, seriously, that's the reality.
Yeah,
and that's
yeah. I
always
actually
tell
have a
people,
1,600 square foot Rambler down in off Flatiron Farm Road that is listed for 385.
is that great
So
bills?
you could not build that house.
Correct.
Yeah, it's down Flatiron
Correct.
Farm Road as soon as you pass Bubba Knott's. Yeah.
So that's it.
You
Right?
couldn't build
nailed it.
that house for
Yeah.
that 385. You could never do that. Even if someone
Right.
gave you the land, you couldn't build that house.
So I think people need to be brought back to reality that, look, building is more of a, I hate to say this, a luxury unless you've given the land and it's like a farm property. It's nearly impossible to do it because even getting a construction loan is expensive. I'm talking about cash out of pocket, upfront costs.
That's the other thing, Tim. That's the other thing. So let's talk about that for a second, because everybody's like, okay, well, I'll just do that. Even if you wanted to build this land, you're not going to get one of these Tim Murphy fandangled fancy Maryland mortgage program,
Correct.
Down payment assistance, closing cost assistance, no down payment, USDA. It's like what, 30% or 20% down
No, I mean,
of the
you can do
total cost of everything?
You can do construction perms for basically 10% down to the 5% in closing costs. You're spending 15%, but the problem in a nutshell is it's mad. It's just maddening, the process. It's very conservative. You've got PMI. I mean, there's multiple facets to it, Brian. It's not an easy
But even
process.
then, you're 10% down, right? So 10%
Right.
of the cost of
Total
building a
package.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So $400,000
It's like
house,
30
you're
to
looking at 40
$40,000.
grand. Right, you're looking at 40 grand down on 400,000 plus on top of that closing costs, 60,000 plus. Plus you got upfront costs that you have to do even before you get the permits. I mean, there's a lot of out of pocket. So 20%, total.
Yeah, the engineering and the permits as well. That's all out of your
Correct.
pocket.
So back to the whole.
So of the hundreds
concept,
of people that have mentioned it to me, I've only ever seen it done twice, and they were, well-to-do people that built really nice houses, down here in Southern Maryland, but nobody was balling on a budget and built themselves a house and looked down and said, I did it cheaper. Even if you GC'd the deal yourself, it just doesn't work.
I want to build a trailer park, but I want to be a mini home park is what I wanted to be, man. Let's talk about that, right?
Yeah. Like I was just looking on Amazon. You can buy houses on Amazon now. They got this new one for $100,000. It's only
that's expensive.
Square feet.
Yeah.
But you know how they do that tiny home living arrangements where everything's tucked into something else and the table folds out to be a chair, and then it's a kitchen table. Then you fold it up and stick it under the couch, and then it comes back out as a bed.
Sure.
The tiny house movement. So that's the other thing people have this idea of is like, all right. I can't build a house. I can't buy a house. I'm going to buy a piece of land and I'm going to put a tiny house on it. Nope. Like, first of all, the county ordinances are not going to allow you to do that. But even if somehow you got close enough, the closest you could probably get would be to have like a call it if you had a truly mobile one that was like a tiny house on wheels, I think theoretically you can park a camper on your lot. The challenge now becomes you still have to buy the land and then you have to do the well and septic, right? But I don't know if you hook it up to well and septic, whether that triggers this being a house. And you can't live there permanently. Like you're not allowed to live in a camper on your property. I think you have to only live there 6 months at a time or something like that. But even if somehow you got around all that, you still got to put the well and the septic in. That's still $60,000.
Or you tap into the existing system. If you can tap into the well and it's going to support the system, or you just tap into the septic, that's the other issue, right? Or you go into some of the alternative septic systems in the incineration system. I mean, there's other options out there, Brian. It's holding tanks, right? You have to
so you
drain
do
the
like
holding
a
tank.
compost system. Yeah.
I think those systems, yeah.
You take a couple showers. I've had campers before.
Yeah. Well,
it just doesn't make sense long term.
When I say holding tanks, Brian, I'm saying 1,000 to 3,000 gallon tanks, and you have to pump them out.
You're talking about the legit holding tanks. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not talking
I don't
about
know
the
if they
little
allow
camper
you to
holding
do
tanks.
those. Yeah. I don't know if they allow you to do those on new construction, do they?
No, but I've seen them. I've seen them out there. I've seen flips that have holding
Where
tanks.
Where else are you going to look for an alternative way to live?
We're all going to Nanjing, Brian. I wanted to tell you where we're heading, man.
Built. So I got a guy at a piece of land in St. Mary's County down in Leonardtown. I just sold it recently. 10 acres on the water.
Yeah.
And he went from front to back, side to side. It doesn't perk anywhere. And because there was no existing structure on the property, they will not allow him. They would not allow him to put in a holding tank. You can only do it to replace an existing septic tank if it doesn't perk. Now, I don't know if it did perk, if that would change anything. So he ended up having to sell it for a bargain price because of the fact that it doesn't perk.
So, but it could be a camper property, right?
Yeah, that's what it ended up being. So how much are you going to pay for a camper property?
On a piece of water? Dude, that's huge, man. Put a pier out there, be able to go crabbing the weekends, go have some fun. Why not, man? I like that idea. I'm gonna look for some camper.
Yeah, but how much are you going to pay for it versus if you could build your dream house on it?
I pay $50,000 for a piece of camping.
But how much are you going to pay for that versus versus if this is like waterfront you can build a house on, it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's worth $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. 10 acres in Leonardtown on the water.
If it's going to cost that much to build, why not? So what do they end up selling the property for?
We sold it for $350,000 as a camper property.
$350,000. That's amazing. That's truly amazing, Brian. Yeah. That still blows my mind for unbuildable piece of property.
But as a camper property, yeah.
Wow.
To me, that was a big number because when you look up all the non-buildable lots that have sold in Southern Maryland, you're talking $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000.
Love it. I love it.
They weren't 10 acres in Leonardtown. It's the only one like that.
But. No, but still, it's still freaking
man.
Amazing.
So I don't see a lot of alternatives, man. I think the best alternative you have to buy a house is you buy a used home and you spend enough time searching till you find yourself a good deal. And my little crack in this whole thing, the way for me to make this work, if I had to, design a path, it's to buy a house that has income producing capabilities, to buy a house with an apartment, like a basement apartment that has
right.
I prefer like maybe one over the garage, or I'd prefer one like off the back of the house, or like a detached, in-law suite or something like that. Or some other way to income produce on the property. Run an Airbnb. Like if you want to buy like a big piece of property, buy a house. I just sold one recently with 20 acres in Prince Frederick. It was a regular size house, but it just happened to be on 20 acres. I would figure out a way to make money off of that. You can timber it. You can do an Airbnb campsite type thing in the middle of the woods. Whatever it is, I would figure out how to do that. It's going to require you to be engaged with making money as a business. Most people don't want to deal with the headache of it, but to me, that's the only way for me to live the way I want to live
Mm-hmm.
in this housing market. I'd buy something that produces money. Well, Tim, bro,
think
you
that's
got like
key.
82 text messages and 14
I
phone
know.
calls.
I gotta run, dude. I'm serious.
Your house might be burning down. So I appreciate your time today, Tim, and we'll talk soon.
All right, brother. I'll catch up with you, man. Thanks.